All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Rage On podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Dean Freeman. I'm a physiotherapist and a men's empowerment coach, and I'm your host today and forever. And today I have a special guest by the name of Todd Wickstrom. He, as I can see, is a jack of all trades and has a ton of experience being in executive positions as the co-founder of Heritage Foods USA, working for many other companies, as well as an entrepreneur, and now currently exploring what he calls the TeaGong Life. I'm excited to learn more about you, Todd, and share your story. I'm so happy to have you here, my man.
Thanks, Kyle. Great to be here. Excited about what you're all about.
Yeah, man. I was really excited because after seeing some of your recent travels off to China and exploring more about what you call the TeaGong Life, I knew I had to reach out and learn not only about you, but what this was and what all of your story was that led up to you on these travels and creating this new lifestyle, as you would call it. So just for those who don't know who you are and something maybe I don't know, could you share a little backstory going all the way back to where you're originally from and kind of give us the summary of what brought you all the way to where you're at now in life?
Sure, it's sort of exhausting, boring for me, but exhausting to share. So I was born in Denver, what will be 60 years ago this July on Bastille Day. Moved to Philadelphia in first grade, then moved to Seattle and did like second through fifth grade, and then moved back to Denver for a hot minute, then moved to Kansas City, where I went to high school, University of Kansas chiropractic school. And then after that, moved to Phoenix and then Chicago and then Milwaukee, San Francisco, back to Milwaukee, Chicago, and Chattanooga.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's the short version. So moved around a ton growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I calculated at one point I went to 12 different schools and went to the same high school for 3 years. So just to kind of put it into perspective. And sort of some good, like I've never met a stranger in my life. I always feel at home. People say, where are you from? And it's like, I don't even know how to answer that question. You know, I was born in Denver, but have moved around so much. But so I've always just felt very at home wherever I am. And I was in Jamaica one time and got this T-shirt with Bob Marley's head on the front, like they all are, and on the back it said, "My home is in my head." So it's sort of like, and you, right? Same thing with you, right? I mean, what's it like? Like
Mm-hmm.
how you still are you in so many different places. And so, I think some of it is I probably have less fear or awareness than I should in some situations. And so I think some of that's been a journey, but been through just some crazy stuff over those 60 years, from super highs to super dark lows, and it's been quite a journey. And I think I got into chiropractic school originally because I wanted to make as much money as fast as I could, and it seemed like being a chiropractor was a good way to do it. That's the honest
Mm-hmm.
truth. But also was very enamored by just natural healing, and my uncle was one of the first chiropractors in Denver. And so kind of grew up around it and had an appreciation for what it was. And but I just got really enamored with like being a real doctor. And so
Mm-hmm.
would study all these surgery books. And I was like, well, you know what? I want to go to medical school instead of this. So dropped out. And while I was waiting for medical school to start, my college roommate called and convinced me, much to my mother's dismay, not to go on to become my son, the doctor, but instead to take over his parents' Chinese restaurant. So that really started a deep passion for being an entrepreneur, and just taking ideas and turning them into reality. And next thing you know, people are giving you money, and then you have to hire people, and just like the whole thing just really just triggered sort of, I remember, one of the first times I ever heard the term entrepreneur in a business econ class in high school. And I was like, yep, that's what I want to do.
Hmm.
And I think I also realized fairly early on that I was never going to be a good employee. So it probably made sense to be my own boss and try to be in charge of my own destiny. And then I remember when I was in college one time watching what at the time was probably CBS News or ABC or something. They were talking about all these layoffs at Miller Brewery in Milwaukee. And this guy was there and he's like, I've been with this company for 30 years and this is what I get. And I got nothing to leave. And I just kept thinking, man, there's no way in the world I'm going to work for somebody for 30 years and let them be the masters of my destiny. Like, why
Mm.
would I want to help other people make more money? Um, but I also, with the Chinese restaurant, got just super enamored with just China and the culture and the food and the history and the just so much. So I started to try to pick up a little bit of Mandarin at the time, because in Chinese they say, like if you say his, hers, its, whatever, they say ta de ni de wo de. And every time I heard them say ta de, I thought they were talking about me. And so I would always hear them say ta de, ta de, ta de, like all the time. I was like, damn, I better learn this stuff quick. But there was no internet at the time. There was no apps where I could just make it super easy. And that was just too challenging, but just fell in love with just some of the crazy traditions that are so different than what we do, just that are inbred into the culture that has been, percolating for 5,000 years. So fell in love with, sort of that culture. And then where to from there? A lot of stuff with family and kids and other businesses, but that's sort of the quick long version.
Hmm. I love it, man. So many things come up for me, and I feel resonant with some of what you shared, especially the constant moving. Although I didn't change schools growing up, after going to university, I've moved all over the place, and I'm currently nomadic in Guatemala at this moment. And I feel what you said about home, the term home. What does home mean to you? Where is home for you? And I get
Yeah.
those questions. And it took me a while to realize personally that home is more of a feeling.
Yeah.
Home is being with a certain person, being in a certain place, eating a certain food
Yeah.
that brings you back home, right? Now, going through all those transitions and changes between schools and moving cities, how did that impact you for good or for bad as you were growing up? And do you think that that's led to you being able to negotiate struggle and change in life as an entrepreneur as you've gotten older?
Yeah, good question. I think that there's on the downside, on the dark side, I learned to be a really good bullshitter
Mm,
because I knew what people wanted to hear, right? And the cool kids, if they went skiing, of course, I skied all the time. I lived in Denver. I used to go up every weekend, just bullshit, right? And so I think that it took me a while to realize that was not a good trait to have, right? Like that's like it's more, um, it's well, we talk a lot about, it's like you're just building the mask, right? Just kind of slowly, and then you kind of have to believe those, and it just gets super twisted. But I also was able beyond that. It's not like that was happening all the time, right? But
mhm,
just learning how to, as much as possible, just to be present in whatever the moment is. And you can't resent the fact that you moved again. What are you going to do about it, right? You're here, you got to deal with what you got to deal with. And trying to just get as present as I could, and not really worrying about what just happened or what might happen again. But I got a homework assignment I got to turn in tomorrow. But always tried to be very involved in some sort of sports. Played soccer a lot growing up, and so was able to get connected with different teams, and that was a good place to do it, right? So you're automatically a part of a tribe, so to speak, and
mhm,
um, so that was super helpful. I created a voracious reading habit because I was just I was the firstborn. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and but just would read all the time. and just about everything, but I loved Western novels. I loved the Hardy Boys. I loved like mysteries and how do you figure this shit out, and like
Mhm.
what do you think's going to happen, and Sherlock Holmes, and all that stuff. So all that stuff sort of kept me company. But when I really was in sort of in a leadership role, it helped me just realize that we're all the same, and that a lot of people, I really thought, even after we took over the Chinese restaurant, realizing that for many people, work is an oasis because their home
Mhm.
life is such shit. And
Mhm.
so if you can create a place for them to really feel loved and respected, and so that's where I really started to understand, like, how do we help everybody function as a team and as a family, and that everybody has a seat at the table and some sort of stake in the outcome. Like, we're all in this together. And so, learned very early on that um, most entrepreneurs, most people in sort of a leadership role, I think a lot of times have a twisted sense of what their role really is.
Mhm.
But that idea that it's lonely at the top, right? And that these guys don't have all of the answers. And so I think it, learned a lot of vulnerability, and from the Chinese restaurant, took over other businesses, and always in some sort of leadership role, but always tried to create an environment where people felt valued, and that I always sort of looked at myself as a what's a good way to put it? Sort of like a human particle accelerator, right? To help kind of spin people out further than they would have been able to go, or maybe not particle accelerator, but whatever, stall accelerator. But really just helping people, find something that they're really good at, and in some
Mhm.
cases it meant I had to fire them because what they were
Mhm.
doing wasn't what they were good at. But I think it's been, really, how do you build a business with compassion, and realize that the team is really the one that needs to get it done. So I think by, moving around so much, and here everybody's the same, right? All the stories are the same. It's just a different school, maybe a different accent, or, you have to take German in this school instead of whatever, Spanish or whatever. But most of it, like, the people are all the same,
Mhm.
and with all the same struggles and frailties and everything else. But when you're in those environments, you get a lot of times when you're in school that way, you get a really interesting insight into other people's lives, right? Into what their home life is like, to what their family life is like. So for me, I just, as a business leader, always wanted to create a place where people could thrive, and being able to have as much transparency in what the business is and how it functions and how it runs as possible.
Mhm.
So I think that it helped a lot in that aspect, just being able to have, so many different experiences, having grown up in so many different settings, and made different friends all across the country. So I
Mhm.
think that just really helped, and then it also, for a while, then I think just made it very comfortable for me to travel and move, and never really felt like, homesick. There was
Mhm.
never that, because even after I left high school, my parents moved it several times, and then, I never visited the house that they lived in Seattle until they'd been in there for like 10 years. So there wasn't, like you were saying, home wasn't the place. And then if you can create that sort of feeling, I like what you said, that it's so many different things. It's like I mean, you say it, right? We say it, right? I feel really at home when I'm around you, right? And so I
Mhm.
think that, and that's a lot of, then gets into sort of the Qigong and the Qi and the energy, and like, how do you feel that connection with other people? Because it's not just make believe, right? There is literally something there that you feel that comfort and security around. So I think that for me, it's made me resilient, I guess, is probably the
Mhm.
best, resilient, and then um, steadfast. I mean, to stay consistent with as much as possible. And for me, that's been really important in really building sort of a daily routine and a daily habit. How do I start my day? How do I end my day? Right? We only have control of that first part of the morning because all the best plans never work out that way, right? It's you could have it all written out and have it all nice and tidy, but the only one you really have control over is those hours before you have to sit behind the desk or, the toll booth or whatever it is. So, to me, it's really bookending your day with those great practices that you are really spending that time with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's helped a lot. So then to be able to have that and then to travel and to be able to have those sort of bookends to each day, it doesn't matter where I am. They sort of always start and end the same way.
You bring up so many good gems in what you just shared, not only for connection with others through business and how you relate, but also relation with yourself. And I know there's a lot of men out there right now who are disconnected for multiple reasons because of our phones, technology, media trying to divide us over a million different things. And it's leading to a lot of the problems that we're seeing, struggles, depression, anxiety, coping mechanisms. And you brought up the great point of how, with all the changes in your life, how you had that routine to keep you grounded through it all, that with all these changing and moving parts, that you had to have something that keeps you grounded through it all. So you can show up regardless of your situation or your environment that day. And I think that's really critical for people to know. But also, not only in connecting with yourself through grounding and whatnot, but you brought up a great point of how we're connecting with others, in that we are all a mirror of one another, that we are not these completely separate beings and divided as the media and everyone wants us to think, based on race and gender and identity and all the nonsense they talk about, but how we are a mirror of one another and how we can see each other in our struggles, in our progress, all the things. And so something that came up for me when you brought that up is, I'm curious, you said that jumping into this Chinese restaurant and getting into entrepreneurship at a young age really helped you with that. But who do you credit to building you into this man at an early age to understand some of these concepts and how it's important to relate to another and how we can connect with others at such a young age?
Good question. Well, for the first, I would say probably maybe 5 years in business, I never read a business book. Didn't even cross my mind. I mean, now there's a new business book every day, but what I did is I studied all the coaches. So I studied the basketball coaches. I studied Pat Riley. I studied Lou Holtz, John Wooden. Like, what is it that, like, how do they have a constantly changing roster? And how do they build these dynasties? Like, how do you take people from, um, so many different walks of life that share a talent around a ball and turn it into this just machine that can constantly win championship after championship after championship. And I think for me, John Wooden was somebody that really understood that they weren't just basketball players, right? It's like our responsibility as coaches to help them become better men. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that the way that I interpreted a lot of that stuff is it's really about building a team. And the more that you can realize, I mean, there's no successful business in the world that has been run by one person, right? I mean, people can do it, right? I mean, you can have people that are whatever real estate agents that make a lot of money and they're just sort of the one man band, but that's a different thing than I think building a business. Building, to me, I mean, I'm sure we could agree on a whole bunch of things, but the world is pretty messed up right now. And I think that if you think about the top 100 economies in the world, 80 of them are corporations. So business, the marketplace has to be a part of the solution. And
Mm-hmm.
if we can create better opportunities for people and train people very early on, ways for them to help take care of your business. And so I teach a lot of personal finance classes to our teams, really helping them understand their money. But a lot of that just stems from, how do you really help bring out what is the best for everybody on your team? And I think that it's like I said, from moving around, it was those teams that where that camaraderie was. or whatever, loathing after the loss, whatever it is, right? But you're still bonding around that. But one of the things, back to John Wooden, I love, and I share this all the time in business, is he said it doesn't make any difference if you won the game, you won the final four, or you lost the final four. You got 24 hours to get over yourself, right? It's the celebration. You got 24 hours to celebrate. If it sucks for 24 hours, that's great. But then you got to get back to work either way.
Mhm.
So I think same thing in business, right? Is like there's like, especially as an entrepreneur, right? I mean, it's that roller coaster ride where I suck, I never should have done this, to like, can't believe things are going so well, to the next day it's like, oh shit, right? And it's like there's so many emotions that you go through. And you just have to realize that there's going to be peaks and valleys. But I love that just sort of, give yourself the time to feel the emotion, whatever it is, but that's not it. Like, it's not over. There's still work to be done the next day, regardless, if you're on,
Mhm.
top of the world or at the bottom of it.
It's a great point because so many people are trying to get to some destination in their life, their destination of happiness or the money or success or whatnot. And I know there's a lack of patience nowadays. I know I've experienced it, and part of that is growing up with phones in our hands and social media and all this clickbaity
Um,
title. And I know that leads to a lot of struggle in men because of this new conditioning. And, you came from a different era than I did, not to age you at all, but you have more experience than I do and grew up in a different background. And I see a lot of men, they are lonely nowadays. They don't have that connection. And you brought up a great point that I believe needs to come back. And I don't know if you've learned this also from Chinese culture and exploring, but the importance of relationships and being surrounded by people that can support you, whether that's in business or in your personal life. And I know you've shared a lot about your business life and having that right support, the right team around you. How have you recognized the importance of that in your personal life as well with your relationships? And how has all of this entrepreneurship and ups and downs impacted you personally during your journey?
yeah, let me think about that one. Um, I think that there's, like everything, right? There's so many different um, starting points. I think, you know, especially as men, like one of our deepest, most insecure tendencies is to isolate, right?
Mhm.
We just separate, right? Because we're, whatever it is, we don't feel like we live up, or something should have happened or could have happened or might happen. And like you said, we're so distracted all the time by these stupid phones, it's just, it's ridiculous. And um, I think a big part of it is that we've really lost sight of who we are, and to really like understand. And if you don't take the time, with some sort of meditation practice, prayer, whatever it is, um, but to really just sit with you, like, who's going through all this stuff every day, like who is, all of this happening. And when you start to really slow down and realize that, we weren't designed to live life in isolation, that it's, I because my mom just recently passed away, this statistic came up, but usually most widowers only survive for 2 years
Mhm.
after their spouse dies, right? Because they're just lonely, right? And a lot of
Mhm.
times it's even more severe if that couple didn't have some sort of social network. Like if they
Mhm.
didn't have somebody else, and unfortunately that's the situation that my dad's in. I mean, my mom and dad were married for 60 years. They were high school sweethearts. And probably during that time, they were apart combined over those 60 years, no more than maybe a couple of months, like a weekend here, a weekend there, like basically side by side the whole time. And then the last 10 years of my mom's life, she really struggled with shingles,
Mhm.
and with, she had not Parkinson's, but well, you would know, essential tremors. And so it was very, um, difficult for them to have any sort of social life. So for basically the last 10 years, they had almost no connection with anybody outside of that. And now my dad is in this big, huge house, every surface covered with my mom's fingerprints, right? From the artwork to the bedspread to the furniture to the where the rug goes to all of that stuff. And he's in a really, really difficult, space because there isn't. And then, when you're 80 plus years old, how do you start reaching out to people? How do you start to build that community or that connection? And I think that, for me, part of it is, I think that there's there's a tendency for all of us, not just men, but for all of us to think that the answer, that what's going to make me happy is out there somewhere, right? Like you said, it's the thing, it's the new car, it's the new. But once we've been around the block a couple of times, we realize, and we know it's a fantasy anyway, because as soon as we get the car, as soon as we get married, as soon as we get the new job, as soon as whatever, then reality sits in. It's the same way, like where they say that a raise is only a raise in somebody's mind for the first 30 days, right? After that, it's not a raise anymore. And that's just how much I deserve to get paid. And so I think that that's why I think that, it's really difficult to be in a relationship with other people if you're not in a really good relationship with yourself. And I think that that's where a lot of men struggle because, like you said, there's so many. Even just since COVID, shit's gone crazy, right? But I think it's also, I think part of what I think a lot of people are struggling with is like they're kind of at a point they don't know what to believe anymore. Right. And I think that that's when you start to question sort of the bigger authority, like you kind of thought things were one way. Now you're realizing, well, wait a second. What about all this stuff? What was this? Who was Julian Assange anyway? And what's the big deal? And, all of this stuff. And you start to kind of pay attention. And it's like, I think that that's where, you know, I think a lot of times, especially in the US, it was very interesting being in China because they have such a different um, filter that they see the world through. But it's just, there's so much cynicism now and so much just distrust of institutions, of leadership, of, any of these things that we thought we were, buying into. And I think that there's a big part of it. People are sort of like, well, shit, what's going to happen now? Because we know this doesn't work. And so there's that sort of bigger, whatever meta issues, like is what's happening in the world around me. And then again, if we don't have that sort of like that grounding to kind of know who we are, and then are you just you're getting your information from one source and you believe what you sort of hoped, that they would, instruct you to believe. Do you have the ability to even make your own decisions? What is the truth? And so I think that there's a lot of that sort of just confusion and cynicism that people have right now, because everything has changed so ridiculously much. And like you said, in my lifetime, it doesn't age me. I'm grateful to be as old as I am, and as young as I am, which is why I practice Qigong every day to stay young, live forever. But I think it's such a very confusing time for people, right? Like we have more technology in our fingertips than people would have ever even dreamed of, that was even possible. And yet, like you said, we're so lonely because we're so disconnected because we keep thinking that something in here is going to make me happy, and it's going to not just make me happy for a couple minutes, but that's the thing, that's the jackpot, right? And I think when you realize that relationships of any kind are tough, right? I don't know any easy relationships. But it's very difficult to be in a relationship without complete honesty and integrity and trust. And it's really difficult if you don't have that with yourself, right? That's where it gets to be really challenging because then you don't trust anybody, right? Because you don't think you're trustworthy. And so I think that for me, it's really important to have a network of people that you can, talk about just life with. And I think that that's where a lot of times men have a really hard time being candid and open with somebody else. First, the guy's going to think I'm a pussy if I tell him whatever, I'm having problems at home, or my business is failing, or I just got fired, or what. It's like there's very few people that I know that have a healthy relationship like that with somebody else outside of their partner, outside of their wife or whatever. Like, and even, how honest can they be with their partner or their wife if they haven't really figured out that with themselves? But for me, having that network of people, sort of I think everybody needs their own sort of personal justice league, right? Sort of that group that you can just reach out to anytime. And those relationships take time, right? It's not, you can't just go up to sit up at at the coffee shop next to somebody and, hey, say, can I tell you what's going on at home? Right? It just doesn't work that way, right? And then so those relationships take time. And as crazy as we are with all these distractions, we don't take the time to build those kind of relationships, right? Because it's so easy because we get huge dopamine hits all day long by just stuff. Oh, somebody liked my thing. Somebody, oh, why didn't anybody respond? It's crazy. We've become addicted. I heard something the other day. One of my favorite teachers um, has a Google talk that he did a few years ago. I think something to the effect like searching for the searcher. Like imagine if you could do a search engine of your mind and you ran back to the beginning of time and you could see all of that. What would the trends be? Like what would you be able to tell about yourself by where your mind goes all of the time? But one of the things that he said that was so fascinating, and I checked and it's even worse now, but the average person picks up their phone 300 times a day. So we have all this time out there, but we never take that time to really understand what is our own mind. Like who is Kyle, right? Because with everything changing around you, like what is that sort of anchor that you even have to like kind of come back to figure out who you are, to be able to have the assurance that you are living to your fullest capacity, right? Whatever that is, whatever that looks like. So I think to me, without those sort of relationships and people to help hold you accountable and that are going to be there whether you hit the Powerball or you file bankruptcy. I mean, those are the people that you want to have connected to you, and I think that that's the way that we're wired to live, in community. And I think that that's one of the things that is so sad about where we're at is that, somebody asked me, like when I was in China and we were in Japan last year, and they're very homogenous societies, right? And here it's like, well, what is America? I don't even know anymore, right? And so there was a hot minute after 9/11 where it seemed like there was America. And then, of course, that turned into a whole bunch of other stuff anyway. But it's so fractured right now that I think that it makes it really tough for a lot of people to kind of make sense of it all. And that's where it's really easy to numb out with drugs and alcohol and Netflix and everything else. And then you just go back to your job the rest of the day. I mean, it's this vicious, crazy cycle that we've created, and so much of it driven by debt as well, right? So we have to go back to keep working for the man to be able to pay off the credit card or the car. It's just it makes it tough. But if you don't have people to kind of call you on your own bullshit and help to kind of keep you accountable. And especially, I mean, I love doing that with businesses, and of course, there's some sort of like whatever ego contest to see, what's your revenue and what did you do last year and all of that kind of thing. But I think it's to have a group of people that can relate to the challenges that you're going through, that have been through similar challenges. And I mean, it's like, even as a coach, right? They say that you can't coach people further than you're willing to be coached yourself, right? And that every good coach needs a good coach. right?
Mhm.
Because we need to have those people that can, pull us up.
So many great points there, Todd. I could take this in so many directions, and I want to tap into talking about your experiences in China and how that's led to you leading this Qigong life now. But before we get there, you brought up something that I want to touch on too. You brought up the values of integrity and trust in a world right now that is full of a lack of integrity, propaganda, lies, overwhelming information. As you said, it's hard to know what is true and what isn't. We truly are in a dystopia already. If people didn't even recognize that, we are. And that's what's led to a lot of this division and individualism, especially in the West. I can certainly say after spending a year in Asia, there is a lot more family life and a lot more togetherness over there. Um, and bringing up that topic of tribe. Now, nowadays we have tribalist views, which I don't always think are good, which are divisive. But if we could go hundreds of years back, we used to be in tribes as humans, and we had leadership, and it was close knit, and everyone had a purpose. But now that we're so disconnected, and there's so much information, and a lot of it is negative, we are so disconnected from society, from ourselves. That's why so many men under 30 are sexless, over 30%. About 50% note that they don't even have one best friend in their life. And these are young kids, adolescents, and in their 20s and 30s. And it's what's leading to this mental health issue. And so many men are going through stages of darkness, struggle, not knowing where to go, what to do, who they are, and being fed lies, being fed medication, being fed porn, and all the things. And so I bring this all up because you've had a lot of successes in your career. You've changed careers. You've been an entrepreneur. But if there's anything I've learned about a lot of entrepreneurs, everyone has hit rock bottom or almost lost it at least once. And that's what led to them building that resilience and perseverance to get to where they're at now. And so I'm just curious, Todd, was there like one of those times that really comes to mind that was really dark where you felt like you were going to lose it all or you did lose it all? And how did you get through that time for those who are in that place right now and need some inspiration?
Yeah, we may need a couple more hours. I mean that list is pretty long. So where to start? On the personal side, um, was married for 5 years, had two kids to a woman who was literally bipolar, and had all kinds of issues. Um, that's topic for another podcast for sure. But got engaged 2 weeks before I was going to get remarried. I was running a barbecue restaurant in St. Louis. My fiance was in Kansas City. And she called me and said, I just got off the phone with Child Protective Services, and we've been accused of sexually abusing your kids. So we spent a year and a half. Or the first year, I was allowed to see my kids for 1 hour supervised visitation a month. And then did everything I could to go get the best attorney and psychiatrist and all this. Fast forward a year and a half later, um, we ended up getting full custody of the kids, and everything was fine. But that was a super dark time, and basically just helpless. Like there's nothing that you can really do. I mean, you're investing in these professionals that it's the only recourse that you have, and you hope that they're competent and capable, and in our case it turned out that they were. Um, however, we allowed my first wife to have visitation, and so we moved to Phoenix at the time when we got custody. And so every time that my kids would go back to visit my youngest son, Alex, um, his mom would always tell him that when he's 13, he could decide to live wherever he wants. and which wasn't true, but she just told him that for years. And he would come home from visits to her and just be in tears and just, just missing her. And so when he turned 11, we got him a really good child psychiatrist to start to go visit. And after being with her for about a year and a half, she came back and she said, well, she said, obviously, you know that you don't have to let Alex go live with his mom, but if you don't, he's going to resent it for the rest of his life. So we let him go back. And that was just one of the super hardest decisions ever. But has turned out excellent in the end. And Alex is great and is doing a lot of really cool stuff and went to UCLA and got his master's in neuroscience. And so he's turned out pretty solid, but those are tough decisions to make, and just trying to navigate through that at the same time had just started a new job, with new responsibilities and got moved to Phoenix to help take over this one barbecue restaurant. And so going through all of that, was very difficult to sort of stay grounded and really being able to not either get so wrapped up in that story and just have it just consume me on a daily basis, or then the other side is that, well, I can't just forget about them, right? So it's like, how do you stay connected to the kids during that kind of thing? So there's a lot, when those sort of things are going on outside of work, it makes the work stuff even that much more challenging. But made it through, and everything has turned out well. But then in 2000 and what would that have been? 2008. Put together a group of people to go to downtown Detroit to open up a coffee shop in the fall of 2008, which was just poorly timed when the rest of the world sort of fell apart, and that was sort of a big ego blow for sure. But I would say, beyond that, sort of the next darkest. Not that we're ranking these, but so in 2017, I had taken over a business from my father that was importing whole body vibration platforms, and ended up getting too far extended on a line of credit, and then the shipping container that we got full of machines was defective, like the whole container. So I didn't have enough money to get them fixed, and I still owed money. And then right about that same time, within the course, like while all of that was sort of unfolding, at the same time, my best friend from high school committed suicide. And he'd had early onset Alzheimer's. And so, which I didn't know anything about it. I didn't find out about it until the night before his funeral. And there was no way. I was in New York at the time. There was actually no way to get back physically. But those messed me up. And I went into a super dark cave, drank an ungodly amount of alcohol, and got into this place, Kyle, that was so dark that you almost completely given up hope. Not really sure why I didn't give up hope. Still had all this tons of debt, and just couldn't figure out how to stop. Like it was so. Like I remember a couple of times, man, walking down the stairs of my condo, and my legs literally shaking just from being just hungover and tired, trying to take the whatever it was at the time, $3 up to go get some high gravity beer at the liquor store. It's just insane stuff. And then just to completely disconnect. just from everything and everyone, and managed to kind of get sober enough to drive Uber for a while, just to kind of figure out what in the world am I going to do? I got to get some cash. So then, like, completely given up hope, but um, kind of held it together for a while, and did some more coaching and that kind of stuff, and somehow managed to keep it together enough to continue to be an effective coach, which I still don't know how I pulled that off, um, but then just started to went to AA and just got a lot of help and a lot of insight, and just still kind of weirded me out, like kind of this, hear the same stories every week from people, and so started kind of wondering at that point, like, it can't just be about not drinking, right? There's got
Mhm.
to be like more to this life and trying to get healthy. And um so was just really kind of in and out, had gone to A little bit. I went to the Philippines in February of 2020 and almost got stuck there. So I was in Boracay on March 13th, which is a little island south of Manila,
Mhm.
sort of like the touristy place. And they came out and said, okay, no more domestic flights as of Saturday. And thought they were kidding. And it's like, this can't really be like a thing, right? And then checked the next morning and literally got like the last plane ticket I could to get back to Manila to be able to get back. Came back and had a couple of drinks on the trip to just to kind of make me feel hungover. Went to the liquor store, and this guy that I had just gone in to buy liquor sold me like a liter of Crown. He said, I got this big bottle, nobody else wants it. So I went home and had like a six-pack of beer and finished that. And the next day, thought I was dead or wished that I had died. And I just remember thinking, man, this just cannot go on anymore. So I found a group that had started online, ZoomAAmeetings.com. And they meet have since, they just had their 4-year anniversary. And every night at 9 p.m. Eastern. And it's perfect for people that just want to kind of see what it's about. Because talk about anonymity, it's a Zoom call. You don't even turn your camera on if you don't want to. So you can just really kind of see what it's all about. And those guys were amazingly helpful.
Mhm.
And got a sponsor through that, and kind of back to the relationship thing. And I was like, man, this cannot be me. And really just help deal with some stuff that I had, make amends and go through all the steps, and really understanding it. But then for me, there was always this part, like, again, it was like it helped me stop drinking, but I knew there was more. So kind of as that same time, then I started working with Lee Holden, who is a Qigong teacher here in the US, and we've helped grow his business ridiculously so over the last few years. COVID was the best thing that could have happened to us because everybody's stuck in front of the screen. And I went through the teacher training program, and it just really helped me understand a lot more about just sort of myself. And it's very uh, deeply entrenched. So Qigong, for people that aren't familiar with it, is one of the 5 branches of traditional Chinese medicine. And so Qigong, Qi being just sort of the life force energy, or the yogis would call it prana, or mana in Hawaii, but different sort of names for it. But it's just that life force energy that flows through us. If you think about a dead body and a body that's alive, all of the chemicals are the same, all the stuff is still the same, but there's no chi, there's no energy. And so a big part of it is really helping to get in touch with that, your own chi, and how you have access to this everywhere. And then really helping to understand, basic. I mean, I look at Qigong now as sort of like an owner's manual for a human being. Like, how do you take care of yourself? So, a lot of breath work and just
Mhm.
simple exercises. And so most people in the US have heard of, or at least kind of familiar with Tai Chi. So Qigong and Tai Chi. So Tai Chi would be a type of Qigong. And so there's different, sort of martial arts, and there's different ways. So a lot of the reasons that people leave Tai Chi to go to Qigong is that Tai Chi, there's a lot of stuff to remember. right? You got 108 things, and here you got to turn and twist and punch and stamp and stomp and whatever. With Qigong, you're just doing the same movements basically back and forth. And so we call Qigong the art of effortless power. And so to me, it's really helped me just very timely, right? To be able to slow down, to take that time. And so it's really then how do you, in all of this chaos, because it's very easy just to grab the cup of coffee or grab the beer, grab the like whatever you think you need to try to make those adjustments, but you haven't really dealt with the root cause. And so one of the things that we teach with Qigong is that you shouldn't go to bed if you're too tired. And so what that means is that usually you've given away your energy to everything else during the day. And if you don't take the time to kind of get you back, you don't really ever get the type of sleep that you need to be able
Mhm.
to be fully back in your body the next day anyway. So we just keep giving and depleting and depleting and depleting. So it's a very good way. So for me, that's been a tremendous part of sort of my recovery, but at the same time has had many manifest sort of side effects or benefits, which is just makes me more present as a better leader, as a better partner, as a better brother, as a better nephew, as a better,
Mhm.
you know, fill in the blank. And so I think it's really helped me. And then the other part of sort of the Qigong life is really understanding more of sort of nature-based healing. And so you talked about yerba mate, right? There's so many different herbs around the world that have some sort of tradition, that they were a big part of, you know, some culture or, and so back to the whole thing in China, that there's so many different things. I mean, I don't, it's take me years, I think, just to finish absorbing everything that I went through. Like I was only white guy I saw for 4 weeks. Um, and like it wasn't the tourist trip, right? I mean, so
Mhm.
really was part of the family and so I think that it's China's very interesting because it's a mix of all of these sort of old traditions um, and the most insane modern technology that you can imagine. Like it's this crazy mix of you know, especially in the bigger cities, Shanghai and some of the other
Mhm.
cities where it's like state of the art everything. You know, next door to the temple that's been there for 400 years. So I think that there's, you know, some of the lessons and things that sort of stood out is that Chinese New Year, um, one of the traditions is that the families basically have a complete financial review of everybody's finances.
Interesting.
But what are your assets? What are your liabilities? What are your plans for the year? Did you get the raise you thought you were going to get? Like it's full on like an audit almost, right? And because it's you should trust the people that's you should have they all have your best interest at heart, right? And I think about how ridiculously this culture is, right? It's just like we wouldn't want to show anybody our credit card debt or our whatever, right? And so, but having that sort of accountability, and then, you know, there's this whole tradition of Hongbao for these red envelopes with cash that they give for everything, right? If it's a birthday, if it's a whatever. And the tradition typically is that the kids that get that from the time they're born, they save all of that money. And so then they've got this sort of nest egg by the time that they're in college. And every time there's a birthday, every time that there's an anniversary or Chinese New Year, right? So they just have a really interesting way of or a really interesting relationship with money. And they don't believe in debt. Like most Chinese families here in the US bought their house, bought their car, bought everything with cash, right? They don't like mortgages, they don't like debt. You think
Mhm.
it's been, I mean, it was poor for so many of those thousands of years, right? And it wasn't really until the 70s that it even became open. And it's just very interesting that as China started to expand and grow and become more Western and became our labor force for a lot of stuff, a lot of Chinese families would send their kids to the US to study and then go back. But I don't know very many US families that were sending their kids to China to study to come back.
Mhm.
So there's such a completely different worldview. And then when you have that filtered through the CCP, and it's a whole other different dynamic of being in a communist country, and the education that they get from a very early age, right? It's not God or family first, it's country, right? China is number one. Everything else kind of comes after that. So a lot of interesting. The one thing that I did sort of think was, that I think that the Chinese have a much greater sense of what China is and a pride in China than Americans do in the US
Hmm.
as a nation.
Yeah, yeah. You brought up a point about the difference with China and America. And the one thing that came up immediately for me is when we see Asians as a whole, but specifically Chinese people speaking English, we don't go congratulating them and being shocked by it. But if you
Right.
meet an American who speaks Chinese, everyone's like, "Oh my God, where'd you learn
Oh,
Chinese?"
totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And I mean, what I love about just the Chinese language, well, first of all, because it's so ridiculously hard, right?
Hmm.
Like it's like you can't just kind of dabble in it, like it's tough. And somebody told me that my goal shouldn't be to become a Chinese farmer, meaning that you can talk,
Yep.
but you can't read or write. And so now I'm learning how to read and write, and all the characters, man. I mean, there's a lot there, but just the stories that they tell and how they come together and what they mean and how to start to recognize those. I always just get so fascinated just about like, how did all this stuff happen anyway? Like, how did the
Hmm.
Chinese get that? How did we like, and how did the Romance Latin stuff happen? And then the Eastern European, the Slavic, like it's like so fascinating to me how all of those cultures and the ability to communicate created and are so vastly different from each other. So
It's
crazy. And then the cultures that go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a completely different world. And I think we over here in America are conditioned to think a certain way. And let's be honest, so are they in China. I mean, they're disconnected in lots of ways from the world through
Yeah,
social media and through the CCP. But so are we. We
yep,
are just marketed to
absolutely.
very well by our government to think that we're not, that Russia is the only one who propagandizes, and so does China. But at the end of the
Yeah,
day, we have the greatest marketing system in the world, that they're so good at it that so many people are still fooled to think that we're not.
yeah.
Although I could go miles into that conversation, there's something that came up is that, everything that you shared, the experiences you've been through, ups and downs, lots of pain, um, I'm sure a lot of fear as well with all these decisions that you've had to make personally, professionally, career wise. Um, and now recently going through that depression, if you will, and overcoming alcoholism. Uh, what have you learned? You shared earlier about values of integrity and trust and how you make decisions. When a lot of people are facing a lot of that fear and pain in life, it often can hinder how we make clear decisions, especially if we are so disconnected from ourselves with all the emotional and reactionary headlines and how we're supposed to think and all the victimization that is occurring and how we are not in control of our lives, but we have to blame everything else. And so it makes me just curious with this and with your life and where you're at now. What values come to mind when you are making decisions and being mindful in every moment, in every decision? What values come to mind and how you make the best decisions nowadays? Because there's so many men out there who I don't even know if they know why they're making certain decisions. They're just doing it maybe unconsciously. So are there certain values that you come back to when you're making decisions nowadays?
Good question. So the place that I've been spending the majority of my time and energy sort of studying is the Tao Te Ching, and grew up in a very conservative Christian family. Like my parents, when I was in high school, I would come home and always be worried because my parents were probably watching like Jim and Tammy Faye or the 700 Club or something at the time. And so grew up and, memorized all the Bible verses and all the stuff. And over the last couple of years, I've started reading the Tao Te Ching to try to
Mhm.
really just understand what it is anyway. Like, is it scripture? Is it a rule book? Is it like, what is this thing all about anyway? And so one of the things that has really just sort of solidified for me over the last couple of years is, I guess you call it chapter 67. And I'll just kind of read through this, but to me, there's three values that are in here, and we actually have these. We call them the three pillars for Qigong.
Mhm.
But it starts off and it says, everywhere I go, people tell me the Tao is so powerful, so immense, it's inconceivable. But it's only powerful because it's inconceivable. If we could wrap our minds around it, then the Tao would be just another thing. The three most important qualities in life are compassion, or showing kindness and mercy to others, moderation, or knowing what a thing is worth, and modesty, or knowing your place in the world. Courage stems from showing kindness and mercy to others. Generosity starts with knowing what a thing is worth. True leadership begins with knowing your place in the world. But these days, I see everyone trying to act courageous without any trace of compassion. They try to be generous, but they don't practice moderation in their own lives. They act like leaders, but they have no sense of modesty. No good can come of this. If you want to get ahead, show people compassion. When other people attack you, defend yourself with compassion. It's the most powerful force in the universe. So to me, I just sort of use those kind of three pillars. Like, is it compassionate, right? Is this
Mhm.
decision compassionate? Am I being um, kind, right? Am I being, showing mercy? And then in moderation, I mean, you can think about it as frugality, like especially in business, um, is like it's so easy to get lost in thinking because you're doing better, you should spend more money on stuff that you don't
Mhm.
need. And so it's really understanding, I think a lot of it is sort of the value of money or the value of things in general. But the other way that I heard sort of that last part sort of translated is said, don't try to put yourself in first place,
Mhm.
right? And I think that it's so antithetical to so much stuff that you see everywhere. Like you gotta hustle, you gotta grind, I'm gonna be the first billionaire, blah blah, trillionaire, whatever. And it's just taking this pace and accelerating it more and more and more. And so I think for me, it's, anytime I've ever had to face really tough decisions, one of the first
Mhm.
things I always do is say, what's the worst case scenario? And if I can live with the worst case scenario, then maybe I should go forward. And if I can't, then it definitely shouldn't.
Mhm.
And so I think that it's really, trying to understand. And I think a lot of times if they're big decisions, I'll write them all down, like really put the pros and cons. And like if it's sort of life, decisions about a job, or if I get this offer, or should I ask for more money, or whatever it might be. And I think that again, it gets back to, really having some sort of foundation or framework. I'm not saying that those are three that everybody should have or that they're the
Mhm.
best or whatever. But I think if we don't have some sort of guardrails, and we don't have some sort of, framework by which to make decisions, it makes those things very difficult, because then you have to sort of wonder, like, what is if you're not really you, and you're
Mhm.
always like, one of the best things, so another great coach, John Maxwell, says only make peak to peak decisions, don't make decisions when you're in the valley.
Mhm.
And so, if you think about like when a business is having really tough times, you want to be careful about the decisions that you're making,
Mhm.
that you're not trying to overreact. Business goes through cycles. And then the other, so one of the things that I coach my private clients with is we go through this book called Real Power, that's
Mhm.
business lessons from the Tao Te Ching. And the first chapter that we go through talks about you're not in control.
Mhm.
You can influence, but like you said, like letting go. And to me, that's part of sort of understanding, I guess, the world through more of a Taoist view is just kind of need to let things unfold, right?
Mhm.
Like I think a lot of times we're so committed to some outcome, some desired outcome, that if we don't get that outcome, that we're frustrated. and that it's really just trusting the process. But I think, for me, that's why if you have a peer group of people that you trust and you've got a framework, that you use, and for some people it's the Bible, and for some people it's whatever, the Quran or other, whatever books, or it's the whatever Boy Scout oath or whatever it is, right? There's some framework that we're using to navigate through life. And I think that the lessons that we usually learn are when we violate whatever that framework was, right? So then we realize the consequences of those sort of decisions. But I think, to your point, I think that it's whoever Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I think somebody says, the most beautiful people that we've ever known are the people that have been through the most dark days.
Mhm.
And I think that for me, it's true is that, you know, I think that a lot of us are under the illusion that somehow there's an autopilot button and you just have to be, fortunate enough to get there. Some people sooner than later, but it's if you win the lottery and that someday, you're going to wake up and it's going to be a beautiful day and you're going to have all the time in the world and everybody's going to love you and everybody's going to wait for you in traffic. And, that somehow there's this, but it's just a fantasy world that we think, and we keep waiting for this fantasy world to happen and it never happens. And so we
Mhm.
keep trying to find answers in other places. And I think that that's where, having that group of guys that come up and say, "Oh, yeah, I think I'm going to go try this thing now." They're like, "Dude, you got to get over yourself. You've been trying all this other stuff. Why
Mhm.
don't you just let's just sit down and talk about it first?" So I think that I think we're in a really interesting time. I mean, as
Mhm.
as a country, as people, as men, as U.S. citizens, as like there's so much sort of like the landscape is sifting and shifting,
Mhm.
on a daily basis. And so
Yeah.
I think that figuring out a good place to feel like you can at least get some news. Like I don't listen to a lot of news necessarily, but I think there are things to be encouraged by too. There's a lot of great stuff that's going on right now, and I think that that's where it's important to have community. Is just like how do you go join forces with people that are always doing great stuff?
Yeah. Amazing. So many things come up when you share that, and that last part is just having discernment nowadays with everything that you're bombarded with. And I believe that's why so many people do struggle with decision making and make the wrong decisions because there's so many opportunities actually. There's too many opportunities, which in some ways feels like people are getting dropped in the middle of a desert and don't know which way to go because there's so many ways to go. I mean, the
Totally.
fact that we're even talking here on Zoom is something that we
Yeah.
haven't been able to do 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
There's a big reason why when I'm in the US, I shop at Trader Joe's and not Whole Foods because less decisions to make. There's only two mustards to choose. When I'm at Whole Foods, I nearly have an anxiety attack and I'm in there for 2 hours and I have nothing in my cart
Yeah.
because
Exactly.
I can't make all these decisions. I only wear white and black for the most part because there is a thing as decision overload. And if
Yeah.
we don't have, as you said, these principles or these values or these guardrails, whether that comes in the forms of people or in just values like the ones you shared, then we don't really know why we're making decisions. And we
Yeah.
end up in places that we don't even know how we got there, why we got there, or maybe those decisions are based on what other people wanted for us.
Yeah.
And so if you are listening to this, this is just so crucial to know like, you need to have some sort of routine. You need to have some form of values that you stick to so that you know when hard decisions come up in life, am I going to go after the shiny red object or am I coming back to what's important in this moment? And we could talk about marriages falling apart in that aspect and, dating apps where you can go on your phone and find a girl or a guy in moments. Um, and so really we have to recognize where are we overloading ourselves with decisions and how can we reduce them through the lens of our values and what is important to us. Uh, and so that kind of just leads me into my last question before we go into some rapid fire questions to finish up today, Todd. It's been a pleasure.
Sure.
Um, Through all this and through all these decision makings, through all these ups and downs, there was something driving you. Maybe what drives you now is different than what drove you 20, 30, 40 years ago. But the reason this podcast is called Rage On is because it's behind this idea that a lot of us as men, we are raging on through something, onward through pain, through struggle, through fear, through darkness, for something, for someone, for a reason, that we all have a purpose, a drive that keeps us going. That rage, I believe, is one of the greatest forms of love that many people associate it with anger, but anger is a secondary form of fear, comes out of fear most of the time. But rage, I believe, is like the lioness protecting her cub from the hyenas. She doesn't step in front out of fear or out of anger. No, she steps in front out of love for her cub and will rage and risk her life to save her cub. And so that leads me to asking you, is there a person or people or a reason, a belief that has kept you raging on through all of this? And has that changed 20 years ago to what you rage on for now?
I think in the beginning, for the first probably 20-ish years of their life, it was for my kids, so I have four boys and wanting to be able to provide well for them. And I always said, I was willing to do whatever it took to put food on the table. I mean, it didn't matter what it was. I've never been, there's never been a job that's beneath me. And so I think that part of that was to really, make sure that I was being able to provide for them in, I guess, a typical middle America way. But I also think that, realizing more and more that it really is about those relationships that you have. And so to me, I feel that same, I suppose, rage, which kind of gets to the TeaGong life and what it's about, is that I think because of things that are so chaotic and because of the transformation that I've seen Qigong have in particular with people, it's really about sort of the power of slow, right? Really helping people be able to make that. And now, to me, I would say that part of that rage is sort of tapping into my inner anarchist to help get people away from big pharma and off of surgery and realize that you have access to so much stuff around you. And so I think the part of it is kind of like the political side of things, if you will, is that there's been just so much of our lives that we've just handed over and sort of take these things, at blind faith, that because my doctor said it was good for me. I just finished watching Painkiller, the
Oh,
whole
yes.
OxyContin story, and it's just like just insane, like, and the stuff that just happens all the time. So I would say, a big part of the TeaGong lifestyle is a very quiet sort of rebellion, but really helping people to empower their lives, and to give them those tools. And we just want to. So we'll have a podcast soon. We'll have a different tea or herb every month that we focus on. So we may go really deep into ginseng or, some whatever ginkgo biloba or whatever. It's like, what is this thing anyway? And who cares? And how do you know what you're taking? But also then teaching people just some exercises. And just we have a channel with Lee, which is called Love Letters, and people sending in letters all the time about not only did it help their sciatica, but now they've stopped taking painkillers and their relationship with their husband's better, and like all these things. So that's part of what just really drives me, is to being so just disenfranchised with this whatever censorship, elite, deep state, whatever all this stuff is that created this mess that we're in, and being able to give people, access to some of these, traditions and remedies and exercises and just simplicity. That to me, it makes me every day. I usually Not every day, but most, I would say 80% track record, catch Russell Brand, and just kind of see what's up and then kind of go back. And then usually after that, that's when I have to meditate because he gets me so worked up about whatever I just heard. I was like, what the hell? But I think that it's really then being able to have that sort of anchor for people. Like it's great to stir things up, right? And it's great to like bring awareness to that stuff. And we need that independent media to kind of help filter through all the nonsense. And there's some really good people out there, but I think that what we really need to do before we could create any sort of like coalition or whatever that is, we got to be really connected to who we are. So I think that that's part of that just sort of drives it, is just to see the chaos that's going out, to know that there's a better way, and then want to help kind of share that with as many people as we can.
Right on, brother. Right on. I am 100% on board with that message. And I love how you're doing it through a different medium. I go through men's work, you're doing it through Qigong and this new lifestyle change. And I'll be curious about how I can add this into my life and anyone out there can add it into theirs. We'll touch on that before we finish up. But before we do, just a couple rapid fire questions and then I'll get into the final question.
You
Uh,
got it.
what is one non-negotiable activity you do daily to keep you at your best?
Ice cold showers first thing in the morning.
Right on, dude. Right on. I'm lucky I got a pool where I'm living right
Mm,
now, so I go for a swim in the morning. It's not ice cold, but 6 in the morning, it's chillier
yeah,
than my bed, sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. Plus the movement's good.
Yeah.
Uh, number two, what food is your guilty pleasure?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I have a new one. I think they're called helados. It's like a coconut, super creamy popsicle,
Hmm.
from Mexico. It just like almost impossible to just have one. Just totally melts in your mouth. And the butter pecan one is probably my favorite because then you get some, extra nutrition from the pecans.
Love it. Love it. Anything coconut keeps me alive. That is like life
Yeah.
down, especially coconut water. What brings you the most joy in life right now?
I would say my fiance's smile.
Beautiful. I love that. Which country, I think I already know this answer, but which country that you visited changed you the most?
Oh, there's a lot. Well, China for sure in all sorts of
Mhm.
ways. Ireland was very interesting. I taught a tea class in Ireland years ago at this school, Ballymaloe Cookery School, and just the people and just the amount of respect and just always made to feel welcome everywhere that you go was just super powerful. Um, but China is just, it's got kind of not a fair comparison, right? Because
Mhm.
it's got so much more history and so much more complexity and so much more, obviously, just personal attraction. So
Mhm.
probably China would have to be at the top of the list, but Ireland was definitely uh, enlightening.
Both destinations that I have to get to, especially being half Irish, but soon, soon.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get into talking a little bit more about the Qigong lifestyle and how people can connect with that and connect with you, my final question to you is if at this moment, right now, I hit a button and your microphone would speak to the entire world and everyone could understand you just for this message. Everyone speaks English for this moment. What message would you share with every human being at this current moment in society that you believe everyone needs to hear?
That's good. I would say that um, you are a lot more powerful than you give yourself credit for, and that um, there are a lot of people around you um, that share your same questions, concerns, values, passions, and do everything that you can to find those people and spend as much time with them as you can.
Beautiful, Todd. Your mic is now off. Beautiful message for everyone. And I think that's something people do need to hear, is that we are more alike than we are different, despite all the people telling us that we aren't the same.
Yep,
With that,
exactly.
I'm curious for myself as well as everyone listening. The TeaGong lifestyle, it sounds amazing. It sounds like something I want to begin to incorporate. I am not only a tea lover, as I said, I love yerba. I got some fresh chai just the other day. Where can people begin to learn more about the TeaGong lifestyle, and how can they begin to integrate it into their lives if they are interested in the various benefits of it?
Yeah, good question. We're so very early. Like my partners are in the process of transitioning. So we'll transitioning. They're still people, but it's a different conversation too.
I know you got to be careful
Um,
nowadays.
so Life will be the website. It's right now being, wireframed and designed, and we actually just finished the new logo, and so we're getting ready to pull all that together. But one of the things that we're going to start doing sooner than later is what we call wild tea parties. And so wild tea parties we'll do a live stream, and we will have one tea, and we're just going to go really deep into those stories and really help people understand, like, how do you incorporate. And for me, I use tea in the most agnostic sense possible. So if you can steep it in water, it's tea. So by my definition, coffee is tea, at least in our world. But just to really understand what those are. So each one of these wild tea parties, so we'll do them in person, and then we'll do them online. And there will always be some sort of meditation, Qigong, breath work as a part of it, and really helping people understand the energy of the tea or of the herbs. And so if you talk about valerian root, if you talk about ginseng, if you talk about some ceremonial grade matcha from Japan,
Mm-hmm.
like all of those have a different sort of energy, of course. And yerba mate, right? It's the same, it's a completely different energy. But then helping people then understand through that and through exercise, how do you then maintain sort of that energy? So really helping people get in touch with their chi. So we'll start to do those. We'll have a podcast that we're working on. My partner Jenny is going to start doing online. We call it Qi coaching. So she's a licensed acupuncturist and Chinese medicine doctor. So she'll do a lot of coaching and one-on-ones with people. She got her master's in divinity from Naropa University in Boulder, and is did work as a chaplain in the prisons for a while. So we really want to help people slow down,
Mm-hmm.
kind of understand what's causing the chaos. How to get it's ironic talking about disconnecting from technology on a podcast and from Chattanooga to Guatemala, but how do you really take that time and to create those sort of routines or those rituals for you? Because I think that, that really helps you to be able to just become more grounded and more present, and help people start their days better and end them better. So we'll have other just different types. I'm going to start doing that real power I talked about. I'm going to start doing some business classes on business lessons from the Tao Te Ching. And, like we looked at those three pillars, like how do you apply this stuff to your life? How do you, one of the principles is, that it's best to lead from behind, and like how do you elevate other people, right? Really help them to become better. So it'd be business aspects of it, but really a lot of personal, but really connecting sort of the tea and herb, the natural medicines that we have around us, then to some sort of daily qigong practice and exercises to help people, just live more complete lives, and teach things like quick little, 7-minute chi breaks where if you're exhausted, how do you get up and just do some simple exercises or acupressure points that can kind of help you get invigorated. I mean, I really got into it because I never liked going to the gym. And
Mm-hmm.
so I want to be able to, help people be able to, take the best care of themselves they possibly can, regardless of where they are in the world. And so you can usually do that even if you don't have access to some high grade tea. That's why I drink a lot of my tea in mason jars, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
just like it doesn't need to be super fancy, but to pay attention to it. And then we'll be teaching composting. Like, what do you do with the leaves after they're spent? How do you save them? How do you dry them? What do you do with them? And, if you don't have any place for them, go find the local school garden or go give it to the farmer or whatever. But, the idea of, being able to take this, delicious, high mountain oolong tea from Taiwan and drink it and appreciate it and share it with friends and then compost it and then eventually eat it in your tomatoes. Right. So really just trying to help that. And then it's just the interconnected, right? Telling the stories from origin. So we'll do tons of video and it's obviously it's deeped in Chinese traditions, but we really want to focus on those stories from around the world. Central America's got amazing stories. South America's got amazing stories and really tell the stories of and just connecting people. So we're going to build a big community online, so people can get connected with each other and really focus on what we were talking about. How do you find like-minded individuals? And if eventually you find that you're in the same city and somebody else was on there, and you get connected and just start to build networks, because that's why I say that it has to be a market-based solution, right? The governments can't do this. The political parties can't do this, but we just bringing people, normal people together that have those shared passions, and then can celebrate life together. Um, it's hard to imagine, given the current state of things, but there's a lot of hope that's out there too.
Mhm. I love it. It sounds amazing. It sounds like it's all surrounded with connection and bringing people together, bringing people together with what they're putting in their body and
Yeah,
where it's all coming from. Something that most people just go to the grocery store and put a piece of meat in their belly and are completely
yeah,
disconnected. And
yeah.
bringing you closer to source, spirit, whatever that may be, whatever your faith may be. So I love it. I love the mission that you're on, and I can't wait to learn more about it. I'll be sure to share with everyone when you start to bring it all
Awesome.
out into fruition. With that, Todd, it's been a pleasure. I feel like we could sit here for another 2 hours
Of
chatting
course.
about so many different
Just,
topics.
just getting warmed up. Yep.
Yes. You bring a wealth of experience and knowledge to the table, and I appreciate all your vulnerability and your openness today. For those men out there who don't have the courage to go there yet, who are living in fear of people knowing their truth, their darkness, their pain. And so just inspiring those men to share it, to put it out there, and just let it be seen, let yourself be heard, and to surround yourself first with those who will accept you regardless of what comes out of your mouth. And then
Yep.
from there, you can build the courage to do it yourself. You're empowering so many people through all your knowledge and through the words that you share. So I appreciate you so much. Keep doing you. And I can't wait to enter the TeaGong life very soon.
Thanks, Kyle. Great. Keep up the great work, man. I love what you're all about, and look forward to supporting you as much as I can as well.
Thanks, brother. Todd
You got it.
Wickstrom, everyone.